And they're probably powering us into a conversation that we are then having this hour that has been brought a lot closer to the fore, obviously, because of recent pronouncements by the president, whereby there will be the compensation. But even as that gets started, he's then been able to make an apology. Okay, well, let's get into that conversation. And two folks are driving that conversation for us this morning to then be able to do that. Christine Alai is the chairperson of the ICJ, and she's here with us this morning. Good morning, Christine.
Good morning, Du.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
It's been years.
It has.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
And thank you for being here this morning. And he's a member of the Kenya Human Rights Commission Board, Kwamchetsi Makoha. Good morning.
Good morning, Du.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How
Good.
are you?
Fine, thank you. Karibuni sana. Thank you both for being here this morning. The jury is out on what we call people from Guinea-Bissau. Dennis will tell you. Then he'll also tell you today's proverb, and we'd love to get your interpretation on that.
We just made it easy. Kenyans are people
Peculiar.
from Kenya are Kenyans. People from Nigeria are
Nigerians.
people from Guinea-Bissau. Guinea-Bissauans.
What did you say?
But the people from Guinea, it's a very beautiful country because it has 80 islands that makes the country, so it's an archipelago. But aside from that, now, one of the things that stand out in terms of the tourism is they have hippos that swim in salty water. I know you're used to Lake Victoria now. When you go there, nataka kuona ile inaswim kwa maji ya nini ya chumvi. But let's go to the proverb. A monkey never sees its own backside. A monkey never sees its own backside. Let us go first. How would you interpret it?
A monkey never sees its own backside. Well, quite apt for the moment that we are in the country, that oftentimes when you're up in the trees trying to pick the bananas, perhaps others would see the backside and the dirt that lies behind. And I think that's what we're interrogating of our state and our government. What lies at the back that we are seeing, that perhaps the monkey is not while it's climbing the trees to pick the bananas.
Komchet, how would you interpret it?
You know, she's finished. It's got the echo in Kiswahili, which is nyani haoni kundule.
Yes.
Which is that you cannot see your own faults. Yeah, just because of perspective. You can never have a 360 on yourself. So you rely on others to tell you where you have
Well said.
defects, shortcomings.
Well interpreted.
Indeed. So we're coming to the time where getting closer and closer to the 25th of June, it was on that day that quite a number of people were killed during the Gen Z protests. Now, the conversation around compensation is mostly centered around this. But interestingly, folks who have lost their loved ones from previous protests and or massacres are coming in to say, well, excuse me, what are we? Sack of potatoes? How about compensation for us? And even as we get into that part of the discussion, I think our first question is taken from the headline in the Standard today. Will the state payout heal a bleeding nation and end police brutality? We'll start with you, Komchetsi. Will this compensation heal, really?
Thank you. And I think that editorializing is probably apt. For two reasons, because we are trying to put and not really to create problems. Let me first of all start by saying that from where I sit at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, we always err on the side of victims. And the pain and the loss that people have suffered can't then allow us to even say the sequencing is wrong. If, for example, you lost somebody 2-3 years ago and this compensation story goes back to 2017, that's 10 years. close to, then we can't even begin to have that conversation about what should be sequenced, because people have gone through pain, people have been dealing with medical bills for that period of time. So I wouldn't even begin to be purist on this and say this is the wrong thing to do. But theoretically, if this were to be done the right way, there are steps. There are probably 4 steps. You start with acknowledgement. You say, I know what happened, and we agree that you suffered. That's number 1. That is obviously being skipped or being papered over. Number 2, we do justice, which is what is the right thing in the circumstances, having acknowledged what has happened. The third thing is accountability. Who is it that is responsible for the pain that you have gone through? And then now where we come to is number 4, and compensation is even a half of number 4. Compensation is a half of reparations. Reparations is big English for repairing the damage. Yeah? Just trying to restore you back to where you were. Now, obviously, if you are killed, we can't restore you back to life.
No.
Yeah.
So that's where this conversation then is a very difficult conversation for us to have, because yes, if for example you've been destitute because your breadwinner was shot dead in 2017, obviously whatever money are going to be made available can go a long way. It can prevent a child from dropping out of school. It can pay medical bills. It can do so. Whatever assistance, I would say, hurry it along. I would even put my principles aside and say, for the sake of humanity, hurry it along as quickly as possible. But the proper way to do it would be to actually say, let us find justice first. And the first step is to acknowledge and say a human life was disrupted, either it was ended, somebody was injured. So we acknowledge. Having acknowledged, then of course, from that moment of acknowledgement, that is where now this demand for an apology comes from. And so, I think the Standard is quite right in saying, apologize. And is quoting victims who are saying, we see what you are doing, but you are doing a backhanded acknowledgement. And that is why this is a very difficult subject for me to engage, because I'm also engaging with it from that point of humanity. And you're like, are we going to look this gift horse in the mouth if, for example, you have people who are in destitution? A lot of the people who got shot from 2017, if you look at the profile of the ages, unfortunately, I've actually looked at all the reports from that time. The profile of the ages of the people who are victims of this violence are young. They are people in their 20s, early 30s. So if you're talking at people who are really at the beginning of their lives, if they are family people, they are living behind widows and toddlers and children. And so at that moment, I don't want to have a conversation about the sex of the angels in terms of, what comes first. I'm like, no, just deal with the urgency of the situation right now. So in that sense, then I start by saying, first of all, just get them the compensation. And then after that, let's come back to the second question, which is, you really, if you're compensating, you are acknowledging that something was wrong. And therefore, and I think I stand with the victims when they say, the first point is acknowledge us. We are human, and then apologize.
Right.
Christine, I'm going to paint it a little bit differently. 2002, 2007 post-election violence, I was in Eldoret. And I remember one of the gentlemen I went to school with, the house was torched, the brother was killed. And that gentleman, one thing he keeps on saying is, regardless of how much you pay me or you apologize, my brother will not come back. Our house would never come back. The history and memories would never come back. All I need is justice for a crime that was done. Let's extrapolate that to 2026. We are saying, we are sorry, we will pay you for it. But you're looking at someone who was killed at 20, at 25, just got off campus, starting their job. Who knows how bright their future was? Everything is just wiped clean. To Today, when someone asks or rather demands that all we want is justice, we don't need the money, we want justice. Are they right?
They're absolutely right. Because just as Kwamchetsi has said, who must be at the center of this conversation is the victims. And if in fact the government is minded to put the victims at the center, then we would have the sequence of this whole process quite different. I think what is significant about this moment is for many years, we have not had this public discourse.
Yeah.
We have not had the state leading the public discourse. You, in fact, have had victims being the ones shuffling back and forth in courtrooms. You've just talked about post-election violence. We have been in court with victims of the post-election violence since then to date. In fact, we just received a notice from the Supreme Court yesterday indicating that in one of the cases where we are now before the Supreme Court, will finally be receiving a judgment for victims of sexual violence who have been in court since February 2013. We're talking of more than a decade of waiting. Now, if we were to juxtapose that moment's conversation to now, we've reopened that debate. And what is very clear is that in the absence of truth, in the absence of justice, in the absence of guarantees of non-recurrence, then we come back to the very same point. Unfortunately, if you count down, look at the years, 2007, 2017, 2027. What do those timelines tell us?
10 years.
10 years.
10 years. We pray that we're not going to have another 27 and a similar situation. But just to continue from where Kwamchetsi left, victims who are asking for justice are rightfully asking so, because what we are lacking in the conversation around compensation now is what is the truth about what happened, right? Compensation is not something you just pick and choose. And in fact, if the government really wants to go the full hog, as we had in the statements that were made in the ceremony of receiving Ken CHR's report, then what we hope to see are mechanisms that bring out that truth. These were the circumstances of how we lost our Kenyans, our fellow citizens, these young Kenyans, and many more. These are the individuals and entities who are responsible for those violations. And these are the measures we're putting in place, not just compensation, but also mechanisms to pursue accountability. And in fact, what is very interesting, and we've seen this, the government has talked about transitional justice. The compensation panel is being led by an eminent transitional justice expert, our senior learned counsel, Professor Makal Mutua. They're fully aware of the various elements of transitional justice, right? Their hands are not tied. You know, the government wants us to believe that in fact the only measures or steps it can take that are within its control is to set up a panel and give 2 billion Kenya shillings and pay out only this specific list of victims and say the journey has begun. What have we seen in the past? There are possibilities for governments to set up special mechanisms that take into consideration that in fact established mechanisms such as, for instance, if we were to say the criminal justice system, IPOA, National Police Service, judiciary, and so on, may not have perhaps the capacity, the resources, the personnel, and what have you, to properly deal with investigations and prosecution of massive nature violations such as this. We've seen them world over. In the same way that the government has taken measures and steps to set up a special process and mechanism to identify and compensate victims of the Gen Z protests, they can also do so.
Yesterday,
to bring in place mechanisms that investigate and prosecute. But even more critically, is the irony. You know, we're dealing now with a lack of coherence that while we're in State House receiving a report that identifies and says we are now ready to compensate in 1 week, just 2 days prior, you have goons who are politically instigated to attack. You have goons and police killing in various protests. There's a lack of coherence here. And therefore, that is what renders the question, is this a matter of political expediency? Or is the government truly, genuinely committed to pursuing truth, accountability, reparation, and guarantees of non-recurrence?
It's interesting that you say that, and even as you mentioned a body like IPOA, which is critical in some of these things. Yesterday, IPOA told the court that it was unable to identify Rex Masai's shooter and the weapon that was used. And they cited resources as the reason as to why they were unable to do this. So when you talk about if the government wanted to, it's not as though they don't have the mechanisms to do it. If they wanted to ensure that the justice that is being sought can actually be achieved, they could. So we're looking at a situation here where when there are mothers who cry, Kwamchetsi talks about those who are just starting their lives and are also the victims of these processes. Why wouldn't they? And does it not speak of then a larger problem, Kwamchetsi? Because this is what IPOA is telling you. The Independent Policing Oversight Authority is telling you that they are not able to identify one of their own who may have been culpable here. That's the justice that we seek. So who do you turn to?
I am going to say some things that are not safe.
Okay. This is a not safe space. Is that a thing? Okay.
I think this is failure by design, including IPOA. And I keep every day I wake up and I'm confronted by some of these issues. I see a deliberate attempt to sabotage all the things that we've said let us deal with institutionally. And I'll try a historical take. And the historical take is that compensation is trotted out as bait so that we can take the transitional justice conversation off the table. Historically, in 2015, then President Uhuru Kenyatta offered 6 billion shillings. 10 billion shillings. She corrects me. Of course, she was working very closely with all the victims. There were 10 billion shillings as compensation for all the historical injustices. I don't even know if that money has been paid. I remember one of the things that we were sort of trying to set down was, okay, this is not going to do anything for people who are survivors of sexual violence, rape, and sort of forced reproduction, because if you are put in a situation where you are sexually violated and you become pregnant and you give birth to a child, and there were children that we are sort of like dealing with, you got to raise that child, and they were not part of your plan. And so we thought that the softer way would be just extend some grace and some assistance. So President makes this State of the Nation address. 10 billion shillings. I don't know a single victim who has received that money. Okay? Since that time, the Office of the Attorney General has been at the receiving end of almost, this is from former Attorney General Githu Muigai, almost about 100 billion shillings in awards by courts to victims of torture and other human rights violations. They haven't been paid. Those are court awards. They have not been paid. Very, very few have been paid. I have friends out there, survivors of all that violence, state violence. They haven't been paid. So when I see President saying, I'm receiving a report and we have put 2 billion aside, there's a part of me that wants to laugh cynically because I don't know a single victim who has received this money.
So are you saying that then with this 2 billion shillings that nobody's going to get it?
I am coming there. I'm like, I will believe it when I see a victim has received that money. right? And the second thing that I would like to add to that is that let us also look at the merry-go-round that has also gone on around this compensation story. First, the president has very competent legal advisors. The former chair of my board, where I sit, is a transitional justice expert and is advising the president. And he knows the sequence. He knows this stuff better than me. And yet, what did they do? They appoint an illegal task force to create a compensation mechanism. By the time you're actually getting around and the court is correcting and saying, this is the correct way to do it, 1 year has been lost. By the time you actually finish, in fact, the ceremony at State House was not occurring in a vacuum. It occurred because a commissioner at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights say, we have finished the structure and the framework, but there is no money that has been provided. And so, we have to come back and say, even when you are making this sort of allocation, I want to take it a step further and say, actually, this is presidential abuse of power. Because if Mr. Ruto is the one who ordered those executions and that torture, this money should come out of his kitty. He has enough money. If he wants to put 2 billion shillings, this money should come out of his money. Because why are you and I, taxpayers, being made to pay for the trigger pulling by police officers on the orders of Ruto?
Oh, so that's where it's coming from?
It's coming from your money.
Okay.
And you see, that is where, for me, rubber meets the road, because we're here talking about we will compensate victims. All right, sour. We agree it is one of the important things that needs to be done. But we equally look at, again, let's paint history. IPOA is telling us that they are unable to identify the shooter, yet the government of Kenya has, President Uhuru Kenyatta at the time, launched a forensic lab in the DCI that is able to take forensic tests to determine what bullet comes from. It's called ballistics tests to determine what bullet came from what gun. Precisely. And I remember at the time, Matiang'i, being the cabinet secretary, ordered all legal gun holders to return their guns so that the footprints of each gun is at the forensic lab. If we told that to the entire republic, how is it that guns that have been bought by taxpayers, bullets that have been bought by taxpayers, a forensic lab that has been set up by taxpayers, and police officers who were deployed were given a command to appear with specific number of bullets, because these things are assigned at the armory, with every police officer assigned to a specific gun with a specific serial number and specific number of bullets? How is it then today we are being told we are unable to do all these investigations to determine who pulled what trigger, who pulled what gun, how many bullets were used, and why were they used? Are we being honest when we talk about we want to deal with this problem, but we shall just pay you to shut up, but we will never accompany justice into this conversation?
It's extremely unfortunate.
Mchezo wa town.
Ni mchezo wa town. Kabisa. And extremely unfortunate. But as we have the conversation, I want to echo what Komchetsi said. Let's center the victims,
yes,
right? On the one hand, where we're acknowledging that there are mothers, fathers, families that are grieving lost ones. There are those who have been unable to continue with their lives, and we want them to be able to receive the recognition and acknowledgement that is deserved. Now, what we are faulting, and also to say that the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has done a commendable job to actually pull together, which was acknowledged by the chairperson of the commission, that there's been years of work. There's been years of work in really reflecting on what should we have as a compensation mechanism, as a reparation mechanism that is holistic, not just looking at payouts, but also looking at rehabilitation, restitution, and importantly, guarantees of non-recurrence. Now, the reason why we're saying beyond that, what we're seeing is mchezo wa tauni, I come back to the fact that the president in his own speech and every other state official who spoke spoke very coherently and articulately about transitional justice. It is a package. It is a package. And if you say that as a country, as a government, he himself, our president, said, for many years we've buried our head in the sand, and now we've decided to confront this issue head on. Confront it. Confronting it actually means that you're willing to question and interrogate those gaps. You're willing to actually say, in the same way you have set up a panel to compensate, where is this special mechanism to query that since last year, how many files have been concluded? What are the challenges? If it is a resource question, where is also the budget line and allocation for proper investigations, accountability, to actually see to it that we can hold individuals and institutions, because here we have police officers who were culpable, but there was a clear policy to shoot and kill. Who gave those orders?
Because we can't run away from that.
We cannot run away from
Somebody
that.
was on the other side of the order.
Absolutely.
And that without that order, the chances of this action having been taken would have been slim.
Absolutely. And who equipped the police? It was not on one day. It was on several days. The police were equipped to prepare to attack Kenyan citizens. We know who the head of the police service was. We know who the head of the Directorate of Criminal Investigations was. We know who was issuing the guns and the bullets. Who was assigned what bullet, where, and when. Look, we do not need to spend another 10 years to arrive at where we have arrived today with the Baby Pendo case. As we talk about the Supreme Court case decision, which we're about to receive on Friday, which is of post-election violence, we are similarly in court with victims, again, for 2017 violations, and the journey has been long for Baby Pendo's family. Similar situation where there's a confirmation that a police officer bludgeoned Baby Pendo to death in her home. A process continues, and the outcome by the investigating authorities is that, we actually can't tell you which police officer bludgeoned Baby Pendo to death. And subsequently, the magistrate in the inquest says, all right, unfortunately, if you're unable to identify who, then this time we're going to proceed with command responsibility. And the magistrate then says, lists, in fact, the officers who were commanding and in charge of the operation that resulted in the death of Baby Pendo. Subsequently, the DPP in 2022 then initiates the first ever crimes against humanity case in Kenya that charges 12 police commanders who were responsible for the operations in Kisumu. Now, part of this political game results in the Director of Public Prosecutions dropping charges against 8 commanders, leaving only 4 commanders for whom we're in court today, on the one hand in the criminal case, but on the other hand, the victims, together with their lawyers, part of who we represent, have then filed a constitutional petition challenging the DPP on the withdrawal charges against those 8 commanders. Now, to cut the story short, how many years are those? 2017, we're in 2026.
9
years.
9 years down the road. And so the message to the government today is really do not take Kenyans down that road. We commend the process that is underway. What is not yet historic, because the launch was touted as historic, but I want to draw parallels. Think of May 2013 on the steps of Harambee House. President Uhuru Kenyatta receiving the report of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission. That was historic, wasn't it?
It was.
What was in volume 4 of the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission's report? A beautiful framework for reparation. What do we have today? Nothing. None of the victims have received any form of reparation. And in fact, I want to challenge Kenyans, because we're now a society that is debating on the basis of information. If there's anybody listening today, sign into the website of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights report. Look for the TGRC report. Look at volume 4. Tell me, isn't it a reflection of this very same report that the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights has, in fact, given to the government and launched? In fact, even much more extensive. Again, move from there. 2015, in National Assembly, President Uhuru Kenyatta then says, the ICC cases have failed, but we still have Kenyans who suffered. And so today, I issue an apology. And as Komchetsi has said, I instruct the National Treasury to set aside 10 billion Kenya shillings for the restoration of victims. And that's what Komchetsi was reminding us today, has never come to be. So the point I'm making is this. It is a significant moment, but it is not yet historic. What will be historic about this moment will be, one, will the right victims receive the compensation that they have been promised? Will, and I say the right victims, post 2007, IDPs were paid.
Yeah.
So, by the way, Kenyans, we've been down this road.
Yep.
IDPs were paid, not all, very few, in ranging figures from 400,000 to 10,000 Kenya shillings. If you were in Kisumu, you were lucky to receive 10,000. If you belong to another part of the country, you received 400,000. And depending on the political moment, because it was about political expediency, you received some money and some did not. And so what we are placing before the government today is, what will be historic is your demonstration that you are truly have removed your head from the sand, that you will compensate, that you will initiate mechanisms that do not leave us at the mercy of a criminal justice system that will keep us waiting for victims of post-election violence 18 years. The children who were born as a result of rape 2007 will be voters in the 2027 election. A criminal justice system that will not keep us waiting more than 8 years like the baby Pendo situation to identify who was responsible for killing. We need mechanisms in the same way that the president has led, by setting up special mechanisms and processes using constitutionally established. We don't lack institutions, we lack political will. And on the back of political will comes resources and comes the courage to do what is right. And that is what we want to see. Then this moment will be historic.
If we use history, or if you use experience as a teacher, just based on what you're both saying this morning, you don't have to guess to look at it. And I just wanted to say that, there are cadres of victims in this whole thing. The people who lost life, there are those who are injured. There are those who were delivered of babies as a result of sexual violence. And again, I'm not just talking about the Gen Z protests in 2024, because it's very clear that this spans across time. There are those who lost property. There are those whose property was destroyed because they were in a place where they did their business, and there were criminals. There were criminal elements within those who may have been protesting. Criminal elements, because protesters and criminals are not the same thing.
True.
All across board. And it's almost very downheartening to say it. But are we looking at a possible situation where a commission may a panel has been set up and this compensation might not happen? Should we be coming to grips with the possibility of that reality?
I have a hypothesis. I'm going to start at the point where I believe, and I think I'm getting to the point where I'm becoming an elder in Kenya.
Okay.
I think there's a pattern here. And compensation usually arrives to announce that justice is going to be late and accountability will not be arriving. Number two, the thing that I probably observe out of this is that compensation usually is a signal or rehearsal for more violation. So, and you know, I think the history is there, that every time you hear this conversation about compensation, we are preparing you for an escalation of violence where there are going to be more atrocities committed. And this is a very sad thing. It saddens my heart to make this admission publicly, but the history, unfortunately, bears out the observation that every time we have this compensation, look at 2015. Uhuru Kenyatta makes this, what would look like a very generous offer of assistance to victims. 2 years later, Baby Pendo is killed. And many, many other people are, of course, shot and killed and so on. And that is where this conversation about the current compensation conversation comes. We are coming to, for the past 2-3 years, we have had the president visiting very serious violence, verbally, including saying, shoot people, I don't know in what parts of their limbs and so on. We haven't had a walk back from that violence. And so we are in this situation where we are talking from both sides of the mouth. So is it okay to shoot people in the leg or in whatever parts of the body you think it's appropriate to shoot them? And is it okay to compensate them? So I think for me, every time we are looking at this, we are just de-escalating the conversation around violence so that we can revisit with more serious or new forms of violence. And I would like to close off that by citing what Justice Alfred Mabea did in Kisumu when civil society organizations went with victims to court. I think 28 victims and survivors from Nyalenda, Manyata, Obunga. Victims of shooting, people were being pulled out of their houses and shot and killed and so on. And he awarded 38 million shillings for varying levels of violations, but also issued a structural interdict. The lawyers here will tell you a structural interdict means a supervised court process, 90 days within which you prepare. And this is now where actually you're getting the results that the state has not been serious. And the court is saying, in 90 days, come with regulations on how we are going to have safe protests. Because every time we have protests in Kenya, we criminalize them. And once we sort of criminalize them publicly from the podium, then we have allowed, sort of quote unquote, we have allowed security services to harm people. And when those people are harmed, when we begin now having accountability conversations, those who are promising, the current security minister, I think promised to defend policemen who violate the law by killing people.
Yes, he said they will defend you. Come.
Yeah, he said, he's a very good lawyer, and I know he's a good lawyer, and he offered to defend. So what side do we believe? When the left is saying, we are going to defend you when you kill people, or the one that's saying, we are going to pay you? And I'm just saying, we have to drop the pretense at some point and say, everybody, including children, everybody who is having this conversation is of sound mind, can process the things that state is trying to do, and we are really tired. This is not a conversation for us to be gaslighted about. The state should stop gaslighting people. The issues that we are dealing with are very, very grave. People's lives have been ended. People's lives have been disrupted. This is such a heavy subject. I just wish that we would not play the kind of games that we are seeing around it.
Christine, let's look at what it is we're discussing now in terms of police excesses, right? And the 2010 Constitution came with reforms that even changed the police name from a police force to police service. You remember the Kavuludi Commission and the interviewing of police officers, all this to make sure that we change the face of the police. Heck, later we even decided to change their uniform just so we have a new feel of a new police service. But to look at everything we've discussed here, and there is semblance of us going back to that tweet. We've done everything wrong is what we are quoting today. Because you ask yourself, even the interviews that we did back then during Kavulidi, return on investments were zero, because you're back to where it is we were. On one hand, we're saying we want to do right. We want to right the wrong that happened. But June 2024, we see Kenyans are shot. 2025, others are killed again. 2026, we see protests. Kenyans again being shot on the streets, people being abducted. And one asks the question, this entire structure, has it been engineered or designed to fail? That everything else we're seeing is just public relations exercise?
Well, I must say that what we set up as a country in the Constitution was not set up to fail. Perhaps where our failure has been is in the individuals we have identified or elected to lead the process of implementing that framework. And so we have been on a journey as Kenyans. We have made significant progress and strides despite what we see today. I think, for instance, the Independent Policing Oversight Authority is one very significant entity that was born out of our crisis,
Yes.
right? And even as we speak about, for instance, the Baby Pendo case, the Sufuria case, and other protest cases that we've seen brought to court, I dare say that in the absence of IPOA, perhaps those cases may never have seen the light of day. And so in that regard, we have made significant strides. Unfortunately, we are now facing a moment of tension. We are stuck at a place where we can either pivot forward or we can seriously slide backwards. And unfortunately, the kind of slide we're seeing is one that, if you look to the future, we're looking at anarchy. How can it be that you're seated in the confines of holy grounds in a church and hired goons or criminal elements or whatever we call them can freely walk in and cause havoc? And that's not the first time where we've seen havoc caused in a church. We saw that with the former deputy president. We saw that at the, in other places, at the Kenya Human Rights Commission.
Officers,
With victims who are gathering to issue a statement. In other words, where we're sliding is extremely dangerous. That in fact the freedoms we have stated would be protected in our constitution are seriously under attack. So what I would say is this: I think we need to pay greater attention to who it is we're identifying to lead our processes of activating constitutionalism. We say time and time again that a constitution in and of itself is words. It articulates our aspirations and values, but to leave them out, we actually need men and women who will be bold enough, who will be credible, who will be honest to get us to the point where we actually achieve that. And so in the absence of that, it goes full circle. If you don't have the right leadership in parliament, then we will not get the right resource and budgetary allocation to all of these independent bodies. In the absence of the right leadership, you don't have the right people leading independent constitutional commissions. What do we then expect as an output? The results we are seeing today are the outcome of incrementally clawing back on this progression that we promised ourselves in the Constitution. But I must say that all is not lost. I think the power, increasingly we realize that the power lies in us as a people. And we have the responsibility to help us get to the next level. Yeah.
The president did issue an apology a couple of days ago, and this was, of course, in relation to this compensations panel that is going to maybe start their work in earnest. Onto what? Not sure. There have been suggestions that a panel wasn't needed. You already have the Kenya Human Rights Commission who does this work anyway, and that they are mandated to do this. You did not need to institute a panel to start having discussions about this and to maybe, bring in a few more coins there where they're not needed to pay anybody. What are your thoughts, both of you now, about that? The apology of the president and then his almost commitment where he said, I will not give another order for anyone to be killed. Acknowledgement that he did give the previous one. So should he then be held accountable? And then why duplicate roles if you already have a Kenya Human Rights Commission to do this exact same thing?
I'll start there with the KNCHR, and I'm very fond of the KNCHR because the KNCHR sometimes stands in moments when institutions are collapsing. In this particular regard, there is one thing I think there is a misstep, and I hope that they are able to correct it. A senior advocate, Wilfred Nderito, whom I had hoped would actually take my place on this show, but wasn't available today, actually wrote to the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights requesting that they do not share the information on the victims with the government, with State House. And the reason for that is very simple, because you've got the integrity of data. If you are saying you are shot by police and then your details, including where you live, is also shared with the state, we have compromised. We've compromised your safety and your security. And I think that is an issue. Even as we are going into this, I think I hark back to what Christine was saying, which is that we've got to be able to do this in a systematized way so that we are not throwing new people into, the deep end, because they're going to make mistakes. Some of those mistakes can be avoided if you are using tailor-made institutions that sort of can deal with it. The question of leadership, I think, is critical, especially of the police service. And if you look at the task force report of the David Maraga task force from 2 years ago, says there was there's a consistent failure of leadership. It's almost like the police is designed to fail. Right? From the Police Service Commission, and those things are not being addressed. For me, I come back to saying that every time you are making compensation for human rights violations, you are acknowledging that the constitutional promise is not being met. Right? Every time you do this kind of thing, you are saying we have fallen short. And for victims, it is not so much about you paying them. It is about how rarely you need to pay them. So the fact that we are having this payment conversation in itself says that we have made a habit. The violation of human rights is habitual. It's so habitual, it's almost routine. And for me, that's a difficult. It's a difficult place, because we have a long history. We have a long 60-year history, and some of those violations are historic or historical. Others are footnotes. But when you lose a child, when you lose a husband, when you lose a wife, when you lose a mother or father, it's not the prominence of the person that is the source of the injury. The injury just cuts us deep. It doesn't matter how important or unimportant you are. Every life is important. And so that's why I'm at that point where I'm like, if the Constitution, and we wrote this Constitution for ourselves, if the Constitution says life is important, life is sacrosanct, why is it that it's so difficult for us to start on that as our base.
Yeah. And I guess a final one from you, Tina, is a lot of people have come out to say that the apology it's kind of like salad without dressing. It's neither here nor there. Is it a first step? Should it be acknowledged as that?
To be honest, if I had the opportunity to advise the president on how the historic event or touted historic event was held at State House, I would have had victims present.
Okay.
I would have had victims present. I would have apologized to the victims. That is an apology. If I wrong you, I look you in the eye and I say, I acknowledge my wrongdoing. I acknowledge the wrong that my government, that the state has put you through.
Yeah.
And I apologize. But beyond that, I must make a commitment that I will not do what I did again.
Right.
How many apologies do we intend to give? Because sadly, I reiterate, as the National Commission was issuing its report, we were adding onto the list of those who ought to be repaired. And that must be the reflection we have as a nation. The question we are posing to the state: prove us wrong, Honorable President William Ruto. Prove us wrong that this time, this is not about political expediency. And how we do that? Not just the money, accountability, and a true commitment that it ends here.
And that's where we ended this morning. And that's a very clear message. And you don't need to do anything else to it. Kwamchetsi Marhoha and Christine Alai, thank you for joining us this morning. It's one to watch. Let's see what happens as we go through it. Thank you very much for being in the Situation Room this morning. All conversations continue. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.